Hello and welcome everyone. This is Vidashri Das from the CSRUniverse, a platform dedicated to discussing the most important aspects of sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Today we are here to deep dive into a conversation on disability rights and the road towards breaking the accessibility divide in India. We have with us Ms. Shilpi Kapoor, founder of BarrierBreak, and Mr. Arman Ali, Executive Director of NCPEDP. Before we get started, a quick background on BarrierBreak and NCPEDP. Founded in the year 2004, BarrierBreak is a digital accessibility testing and consulting firm based in India. Ms. Kapoor herself is an Ashoka Fellow and a recipient of NCPEDP Shell Helen Keller Award 2008 for being a non-disabled role model supporter of increased employment opportunities for people with disabilities. The National Center for Promotion of Employment for Disabled People, or NCPEDP, is a New Delhi-based trust established in 1996 to champion the cause of disability rights. Mr. Arman Ali himself has been a disability rights activist for over 20 years. He was part of UNESCO's editorial board on State of the Education Report for India 2019, Children with Disabilities. Thank you for joining us today, Shilpi and Arman. Shall we start with the discussion?
Please. Thank you for having us.
The first question is an open question, both for you. Your most recent report, Digital Accessibility Landscape of the Finance Sector in India, it highlights the prevalence of accessibility errors in India's financial sector. So what is your interpretation of this high accessibility error rates? Do you think these numbers reflect a lack of awareness, prioritization, or something else entirely?
So I think I'm going to let Arman put context to it before I talk about the numbers. How does that sound, Arman?
I think, Shilpi, go ahead, talk about the numbers, start with that. I will put the context because there's a very pointed question from Vedasri. So where you think is the problem? Yes.
Sure. So, Vedashri, what we are seeing is what we've basically done with this report is we've analyzed 100 financial sector organizations. Right? These organizations are leading organizations in India, and we've classified them under multiple sectors. So it is, not only banks, but it is also insurance companies, it's payment gateways. The future of digital access, finance is one of those leading sectors that is taking that on. So when you look at the data of, the report, the data gives us that we have as high as 90 plus errors on an average in most of the sectors. We go as high as 120 errors on a homepage, down to as low as about in the 80s. Now, the reality of the sector is that these are actually very simple things that you and I need to do from a digital landscape perspective to make websites and mobile apps accessible. Right? Now, these are some things as simple as if there is an image on a website, does that image have an image description so that people with disabilities get access who cannot see the images? Now, something as simple as that, which is actually hygiene. The data basically tells us that the financial sector is yet not considering digital accessibility in their thought process, like how they look at security, how are they looking at compliance. We haven't reached that point of us that we are a priority and a mandate for these people to build inclusion. So the data tells us that a lot of what we are seeing, which they've done well, might have just been something that's happened by chance. Right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily something which is systemic in their systems. It is not something which they are conscious about and are thus doing. So I think the data tells us very starkly that this financial sector needs to sit up and look at people with disabilities as customers, because they are customers. It's not possible that 15% of India's population, if we look at, goes out and does not, access finance, right? I think so that is what it is basically telling us at the top of it, that leadership in the financial sector needs to consciously come up and ask the question, are we including these people? And financial inclusion has been one of those conversations in India, whether you talk about rural inclusion, but financial inclusion is always an overarching statement, right? And in that world of financial inclusion, are we leaving people with disabilities behind? And that is really what this report is talking about. I think it's important that the financial sector actually pulls out this report, and I don't want to make this a very data heavy conversation because I want people to understand the need for us to go out and do this. But things like, just headings on a page, things like image descriptions, things like forms being accessible, these are good development practices which lead to accessibility for the larger ecosystem of people with disabilities.
Arman, would you like to add something?
I completely agree with Shilpi. And just to contextualize what she said, we are not asking to replace all the buses used by transport in India as a low-floor buses. We are not asking you to make a three-storied building to install a lift immediately in all the buildings in the country. We are not asking you to dole money to disabled people because you run a financial service. Financial inclusion is a right, okay, and if you look at the government's very pioneering and very empowering initiative of the honorable prime minister of Jan Dhan Yojana, where to have a bank account for every person in the
Yeah.
country, disabled people were not included there as well. There's still challenge. People with multiple disabilities, different disabilities still have challenge. Blind people have challenge in opening an individual independent bank account. Now, again, you bring into the question that do we go to bank nowadays? I mean, you ask yourself, when was the last time you went to a bank?
Yeah.
All our payments, everything we purchase or you do, even if you want to get an insurance done, if you want to make a payment, if you want to invest, everything is digital. And
Yes.
it is hygiene, as Shilpi is saying, that to you make a product or a service which takes everybody along. This looks like a very systematic approach of excluding a particular community. And accessibility always does not mean very technical things. Sometimes it means a easy to simple language to understand for
Yeah.
people who have a neurodivergent disability or psycho disability.
Yes. Yes.
These are all you make anything that you do in India or you are trying to do it for the world, because now we are not doing a product or a service which is very local unless it is something very specific as a treatment which is very specific for every problem that you have. These financial institutions are providing services which is a solution. I mean, it makes it easy to do business. It makes it easy to participate in the society to you know to to get what you want. And these are not services. Again, the fact also, Bedashi, that you look at disability as a welfare and a charity issue all the time. You think that inclusion will mean that there's a cost involved. You don't look at it as an investment. So investment means you
Yeah.
are including 10 to 15 crore people to your business, whether it is insurance, whether it is UPI, whether it is ordering food, whether it is e-commerce, or and so on and so forth. But this report is very specific to financial services. But if you look beyond that, so financial services, why it was picked up, it's a business model where you are looking at people to come and add revenue to you. The more, the merrier. I don't understand where is the disconnect. The law is very clear. The Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016, that all product and services and anything to do with ICT has to be accessible for people with disability. So the gap is as you rightly pointed out, is in awareness. The knowledge is there. It is the awareness and this attitude of that we can do. The leadership doesn't have that attitude of saying that we will take everybody along. I mean, you dare say this to for women now, that we'll not include women for
Yeah.
in our
That's
workforce.
true.
You dare do it for any other marginalized community, that whether it is through gender, religion, or caste, and so on. But disability is something which cuts across. You'll find women with disability, you'll find people with all religion, and caste and income group. Why not include? It adds value. If there's one person with disability in a family, that, and if it is accessible for disabled people, it is accessible for all. They will all go to that product, that service.
Also, I just want to add to what Arman just said. When you talk about disability, we also have disability and impairment, right? So as we're aging, all of us face a lot of different challenges and impairment. So much of the people that are going to the banks and who are using financial services are also the elderly. Right.
Yeah.
I can look at myself as I'm aging. I never needed specs today. Text contrast is very, very critical to my life today. Right. So I think it's time for people to realize the user experience that accessibility brings on for everybody is far overarching, right? And that includes all of us, right? So I think, and we're all going to need some of these support services or some of these things as we go along, not even support services. They just are ubiquitous, like how you and I have started to use speech recognition on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what the financial sector needs to realize, that we're not asking for something extra. We're just asking them to use technology in the way technology is, improves the user experience for everybody and obviously includes people with disabilities.
So basically, if you really think about it, it's both the lack of awareness and also prioritization among the leadership, right? That is making the financial sector exclusionary at this point for at least disabled people. Correct. Shilpi, the next question is for you. It is about assistive technologies. So, what do you think are the existing barriers, like we just spoke about, technological or financial or cultural, in assistive technologies such as screen readers or magnifiers or adaptive keyboards, even in India? So, also, are there any initiatives to encourage the development of assistive technologies that cater specifically to regional languages?
So let me start with talking about what is assistive technology, because a lot of people don't understand that.
Yes.
Now, this is technology that people with disabilities will use to access their tech, whether it's their websites or their mobile apps. Now, the best part for you and me is today there's a lot of assistive technology already in our operating systems, whether it's Windows, whether it's Android, whether it's Linux. Right? It's already there. Like, even if you go and just pick up your television, it has accessibility today within it. So it's a lack of awareness. When we talk about accessibility, right? A simple question to all the people listening in: if you are doing pinch and zoom and increasing the text size, you're already using an assistive technology. And I guarantee you, most of us are using it, right? Now, the power of assistive technology is it is there to assist you. Right? It makes your life easier and makes you be able to do a lot more. Now, yes, for people with disabilities, we do need specific technology. But like if you look at your mobile phones, right? Today, mobile phones have screen readers like TalkBack and VoiceOver within them, right? And there are open source solutions. The challenge sometimes does come for Indian localization of solutions. But today, it's being overcome because the operating systems itself are looking at localizations. When they look at localization, we get a large amount of this. Should we be doing more for regional languages? Yes, right? But what we need to realize is, first, we at least need to get the people who have access to all of these existing languages, at least access. They are only being denied access, right? It's not only just a regional language. So we need to invest more in assistive technology, and Arman and NCPEDP are doing some great work in that space. But assistive technology also needs a market, right?
Okay.
When it comes out of the operating system, it's in everybody's hand, right? You don't have to go and buy it. You don't have to go and take an add-on. But assistive technology is something that is becoming part of everyday life, right? And today, let's take an ATM, for example. Right? It is not difficult to get an ATM to start talking, because the operating system it's built on is an operating system which has accessibility within it. The problem is that we are not enabling that. The same thing pause, right? So point of sale services are also not built on any different technology. They're built using the same operating systems. right?
Hmm.
If you look at your, POS systems, or you look at your credit card, debit card machines, everybody can use them. We are not enabling the feature to make it accessible.
Hmm.
And then we are not designing the applications on top of that to make the user experience accessible to everybody. So I think
Hmm.
that's the gap. When it comes to assistive technology, we do need to invest from an India perspective on languages for sure. But we should extend these same solutions and give them the language support that we need, like we are doing in other things when it comes to localization.
Yes, yes. Aman, next question is for you. You have been a disability rights activist for almost 2 decades now, or more than that. Correct me if I'm wrong. And have been part of many government-appointed committees. Can you tell us how effective are India's current legislative frameworks, such as the Right of Persons with Disabilities Act, in ensuring accessibility in workplaces? Are there significant gaps in enforcement?
To Bedasri, we have one of the most powerful legislation in the world. India
Hmm.
was the first country to ratify
Hmm.
UNCRPD, and then we have a law which is not completely harmonized, but quite close to the UNCRPD. Um,
Okay.
if you talk about accessibility of workplace, that's not the solution. How do you go to work? How do you find work? If you can go to a school, if you can get education, if you get a skill, if you get some training, and if the training is accessible to you, if the education system is accessible to you, then you get a job. And how do you get a job and education? If you find accessible transport, if you find accessible infrastructure, if you find accessible ICT or any information that you want, which is in an accessible format. It's as simple as if you're able to zoom your screen on and read the text, or you have a large print, or you have a lecture which is happening in sign language or in speech to text or text to speech. So
Hmm.
just creating a accessible workplace environment is not the solution. The solution is
Okay.
the entire ecosystem. It just cannot have I mean, you cannot compare an orange with an apple.
Okay.
Right. So you may have the best of work accessible transport system in a way of a metro, but how does I reach a metro on my wheelchair from my house, right? So then if I
Yes.
asking an auto rickshaw to come, the auto rickshaw is not accessible. If the Uber app is if I'm using for a cab, if that's not accessible, so the implementation is very scarce. There's a lot of noise around disability, though everybody is talking about disability. But
Hmm.
just like this report, where it says 90 plus 90%, 90%, more than 90% of the websites are not accessible, or these apps are not accessible. It gives you the thing. Everybody, all of these leaders who are CEOs and CTOs knows about disability. It's not that they've never heard about disability. It's just this willingness to include disability in everything that you do. I mean, will you have any building without a staircase to the first floor? You'll not put a ladder
Hmm.
outside. No, that you the ladder is only in the
Yes.
construction stage. So,
Yeah.
like this everything is common sense. So there's such acute lack of awareness around disability. You look at disability as a cost. You look at disability as a stigma. You look at disability as a hazard. You think
Hmm.
the inclusion of any disability a feature would cost you a lot of money. I think these are very how do I say it? Myths that has prevailed with disability for ages, and in
Hmm.
this time of technology and information sharing, I think unless there is a leadership which is
Hmm.
taking stand that everything that
Hmm.
I do, my product and
Hmm.
services are accessible, we will continue to remain invisible. We will continue to remain an afterthought. And mind you, today tech is not limited to only an urban space. Everybody,
Yes.
when you we are all in three different locations probably and talking, right? This is because of the technology. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter whether you're coming from Chicago or Saharanpur or some place in the northeast, where if you have the technology, it is enabling you to participate. And all that we are saying, that the technology is there, it's just your willingness, the leadership to make your products, services, website, apps accessible, or infrastructure
Yeah.
or transport.
Yeah.
And then people with disability are paying tax in this country. We are tax.
Yes.
We are not a second class citizen. Nahi? कि मतलब
Yes.
you are under consideration when we will give you citizenship. then we'll go for your right. We are more taking, we are actually leaders, we are using products and services. Our families are buying products on an everyday basis. So why not include us? Why do we have to be apologetic about who we are? Why do we have to come out with a report like this and say, call out names to say,
Yeah.
do something about it?
Yeah, it's an example of where something probably should be
So Vedashri,
basic human rights.
we can just put it in the simple, there's a lack of will, whether it is
Yes.
political, whether it is business leaders, that there's lack of leadership, there's lack of will, and then that's how you just cannot make a ramp and say that we are accessible, right?
Yes. The next question is again an open question for both of you. So we discussed about your, report on the financial sector and how there are glaring accessibility issues in it. So, given the current state of accessibility in the financial sector, how do you think it impacts individuals with disabilities on a personal and societal level?
Okay, so let's take a very simple thing today, right? Today I can get into an auto rickshaw, which is one of the cheaper modes of transport in our country, and I can pay using a UPI, right? I don't need to carry money. I don't need to worry about it. Now, I have one of my employees at BarrierBreak who is a person with a learning disability. And I remember when he started to come to work, one of the biggest challenges his parents had was giving him money in his hand because he might be duped by somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Today, with him having that mobile access of money in his hand, they know that one, they can't be duped. Second, if they see a large payment, they can, reach out to the bank or reach out to him and find out what's happening. And there is information that you can set targets like, he can spend 500 rupees or not more than that. And you create systemics. So here I'm not even talking about the assumption that people assume everything accessibility is only for visually impaired people, right? That's the assumption for everybody. But this is not about visual impairment. I'm giving you an example of somebody who is autistic, right? And has learning disability. Now, now when you talk about people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and when they go to a bank, they don't have anybody who knows sign language. They can't access their own solutions, right? They literally struggle to talk to bank personnel. Now just think about that. Now, if you give them that same information on their handheld device, right? Even if you give them customer support, right, using IVR, you're taking away so much of that pain. So I think when you talk personal, these are the personal stories that I'd love to let people understand that there is so much more to tech. And that's what we've been seeing. Tech will help you break barriers, right? And let's break those barriers. Let's not make tech become the barrier that everybody has to jump over to get access, right? I've been telling banks for such a long time, you'll have, phone SMS-based banking. It's such a beautiful thing for people who can't get to the bank. You don't have to. And even if people don't text so well, one SMS and you get your bank balance, one SMS and you get your last 5 transactions. Just think about the power of that for people who need to make life easy for themselves. And I think that is the stories I'd like to talk about, as much as it is for the visually impaired and getting access to talking ATMs, etc. But I think we need to understand that digital accessibility will help everybody across the board.
Thanks, Shilpi. Arman, would you like to add something?
Vedashri, this is a no-brainer. India is the most populous country in the world. It also means the highest number of people with disability in the world are living in India. And they're not living in isolation, they're not living alone. They're living with their family, they're living in a community, they're one of us. And anything which is accessible for disabled people, it does not discriminate with anybody else who does not have a disability for that matter. So that's my small bit on this.
Okay. My next question is also for you, Arman. So while we are talking about digital accessibility, what I've seen, and I think what is a very common phenomenon in India is that workplaces, they don't even feature basic accessibility, features like ramps or elevators or accessible restrooms. And studies indicate that many employers in India are in fact unaware of their legal obligations regarding workplace accessibility. So, what kinds of systemic issues do you think prevent organizations from making their spaces inclusive?
I think it's a compliance issue. I think disability accessibility, accessibility for disabled people is not part of the compliances that you have for businesses or
Yeah,
so if you don't have a pollution certificate, you cannot set up certain businesses, or you cannot drive also if a traffic
yes,
violation
yes,
is there. If you jump a red light, there is fine penalty. If you don't wear a seat belt, there's a fine and penalty. If you cut a tree without the permission in a certain kind of trees, you there is a kind of jail term. But when it comes to disability, when you violate it, it doesn't kind of nobody flies, like it doesn't flick anything. Disabled people are just posting on social media. One day it will come
yes.
in newspaper, next day it moves on. So I think there's a compliance issue. There's a lack of political will. There's lack of understanding of rights-based approach towards disability inclusion. Disabled
Hmm.
people themselves don't understand that the identity of disabled person. They don't own it, and looking at disability as welfare charity issue, we're getting pension of 1,000 rupees or 100 rupees per month, and 300 rupees in some two states that I know of. If you only look at that as your entitlement and that as your right, then I think we have lost the cause, we have lost the purpose, and that kind of makes a big divide because the large number of disabled people are in the rural areas. 70% of them, if you look at the census data, and in the rural areas, how you look at disability and urban, it's different. No, there's a big huge divide in that, and you still associate disability with stigma and sin. And then if you compare that, and in terms of compliances of include accessibility into businesses and everyday life, it's a huge ask. Unless there is a commitment from the leadership, the CEOs of large companies and organizations and governments, we don't think we'll be able to reach where we want to.
So, do you think bodies like, NCPEDP, they play a role in educating and training employers about these requirements?
It's not about
And
only employment, Vedashree. So NCPEDP, BarrierBreak, and hundreds of organizations like across the country are doing this. We are trying to educate people. But India is a large country. The agenda, is huge. In that agenda, list of agenda, disability doesn't figure out.
yeah,
Disability is an afterthought. It's
hmm,
you're not part of the party. You are part of the leftover after the
hmm,
party. So anything that you decide. So if you look at for example, disabled people are not the only people in the country who are receiving pension. You pension is being given to farmers, pension is being given to women, girls in school, widow, war veterans, and so it's a long
yeah,
list. But when
yeah,
it comes, but they are also able to participate in the labor market. They are also able to
yeah,
participate in education, in employment, in public life. But disabled people, when they receive this kind of social security support, that's the only thing that they get, because the environment is not. Again, I'll bring this example of this tech, edtech, and fintech companies keeping us out of to participate or access these services. Limits our involvement in the in everyday life, in participating in nation building, if I can say that. So one, there is a ray of hope, as I say, because one, that we have done this study, and Barrier Break and NCPDB will do this every year. We'll release a report, and we will also help all this organization to kind of do a course correction and add more revenue to their um, business. I will again reiterate this: whatever we asking is not asking them to give money to CSR, money under your CSR to disability. That they must do. If they do what we are asking to do, that will add more business to them. So that's
yeah,
one. And now there is a Supreme Court order on the 8th of November, which is making accessibility a fundamental right. The Supreme Court has asked the union government to come up with non-negotiables when it comes to accessibility. So there is Rule 15 of the RPwD Act, which has a guidelines on ICT. So we already have a ICT guidelines which is talking about accessibility of tech. What is there which is non-negotiable? So if one the non-negotiables which the government does in partnership with disabled people's organization, everybody will have to fall in line. So we don't want that situation comes and then you get into a firefighting. I think the work starts now. I think you start your process now. You make accessibility as part of your work culture, as a policy, as something that you do as a non-negotiable for anything that it doesn't kind of bring down the value of anything that you do. It only adds more.
Yes, yes. But going back to my question is, what role do bodies like NCPEDP play in
We
educating employers?
the
And how are you scaling up that awareness if there is any initiative towards that end?
So one, Vedashri, we are a non-profit organization. We are not a government body.
Yes,
We survive on donations and grants from
yes,
organizations. From the last 25 years, we have been running an award, the Helen Keller Award, which is recognizing
yes,
efforts made by organizations and people to promote inclusion of people with disability to employment. So
yeah,
that is one of the advocacy thing. We are the first organization who kind of released the equal opportunity policy for people to kind of incorporate. We promote reasonable accommodation. We constantly engage with organizations like CII, NASCOM, FICCI,
okay,
and all the time talking about it. We are the people who came up with the report of that less than 1% of people with disability in the country find this meaningful employment. So our is more of an
okay,
advocacy, more research, more awareness
yeah,
generations, and we constantly talk about employment
yeah,
and we keep doing this thing. A lot of organizations reach out to us to help them understand certain needed things. People reach out to us to help them find resources with disabilities. We connect them with organizations who are doing that. So constantly, there is an engagement with the industry, constantly with the government to look at issues around employment.
yeah.
So
Thanks, Mr. Arman. Ms. Shilpi, my question is regarding barrier break, okay? So, your organization employs a significant number of individuals with disabilities. So, what strategies ensure that inclusivity and productivity take place at your workplace? And how do you encourage other businesses to adopt similar inclusive hiring practices?
So, firstly, inclusion is, I think people have just got scared of the word inclusion. It's actually very simple. You just have to treat people the same. It's really nothing beyond that. You'll be shocked to know that unlike organizations, BarrierBreak even doesn't even have an equal opportunity policy. Every policy of ours has equal opportunity within it, right? Whether it's leaves, whether it is, care, whether it's pay. Uh, I shouldn't even have to look at the person's disability to decide what it is that they should be given as an increment year on year. I need to look at the work that the person does, and that's the credibility that we have to bring. So I think people are very scared about hiring people with disabilities. I find a lot of people asking me questions like, how do you hire a person with disability? It's not doing their job like any other. There's no difference, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
I think that this mindset is of charity, is what's making them
Hmm.
hire people. The
Hmm.
mindset has to be of equality and productivity and treating them as equals, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I have, the moment you deal with it like that, everybody in the organization benefits, right? The organization itself benefits. My
Yeah.
people with disabilities, I've never ever had a separate benchmark for them. I've never gone
Hmm.
on record and said, oh, just because you are an accessibility tester with a disability, you will only do X amount, whereas your counterpart will do more than you. I
Yes.
can tell you they can perform at the same pace and sometimes even better, right? My own chief accessibility officer is a person with a lived experience of a disability, and she's the most amazing accessibility expert I know in the country, right? So why are we making these assumptions that people with disabilities need something? The challenge is open the doors and let them come in,
Yeah.
right? Give them the access to learn, give them the accommodation they need, that if they are deaf, they need a sign language interpreter for a training. If they are visually impaired, they need certain tools in the organization. That is what you need to provide. You need to provide that kind of an ecosystem to be, right? The question that you asked, what are organizations like NCPDP or BarrierBreak doing to promote all of this? Arman and I can go and speak to people, right? But this is not rocket science, honestly. This takes will. This takes somebody at the top saying, I believe, and this is going to happen organization wide. If I can do that with 270 plus employees, and that's not a small amount.
Yeah.
Arman has a sizable team himself, including his earlier organizations, Shishu Sarthi that he was with. And it's not that people with disabilities can't coexist with everybody else, but we are making this a problem. If I can have such a large number of people with disabilities in my organization, why can't other organizations? Why are other organizations struggling to hire 1%, 3% people with disabilities, and why are people scared about it? So I think that the opportunity here for employers to realize is people with disabilities are no different, right?
Yeah.
You just need to give them certain accommodation based on a disability if they do need it, and ensure that your solutions, your systems, your places are inclusive and accessible, which will apply to everybody, right? If we do that, there will be more people who will go into education, get higher education, we'll get more skilled people, right? We will have better quality of people, and honestly, the 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 conversations that happen when you have a diverse group of people together is something every organization talks about, and there's study and research to show all of this, that there is value in this. So I think it's not for us to build awareness. We are happy to go and anybody and everybody who asks for advice, but I think it's for people to realize that they need to have a mandate and they need to have a commitment to accessibility at the top.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Kapoor. Last question there. It's again an open question for both of you. What specific actions do you believe financial organizations should take to integrate accessibility into their digital transformation journeys? Like, what specific actions can they take? And are there any immediate priorities they should address?
Okay. So I'm going to go first and let Arman close on this entire topic, I think. When you talk about digital accessibility, the first thing that financial sector needs to realize is there are accessibility standards and guidelines in the world, globally accepted by organizations worldwide. So there is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, and India has the IS 17802 as a standard. They need to go and ask their tech teams to understand all of this, right? They need to ensure that these, accessibility and inclusion starts at the design phase within their products and solutions. It cannot be an afterthought, right? They need to bring that into their organization and ensure that these products do not get released. Like, you cannot release a product with a security bug. You should not be able to release a product without accessibility within it. They need to bring it into their processes. They need to have people who are accountable for this. Accessibility just can't happen out of a CSR foundation. Those people don't even understand technology. Let's be clear, right? What we really need is for the tech people to come forward in these organizations and own accessibility. Your chief product officer, your chief technology officer, these should be the guys who should be looking at this. And then provide training to your teams so that they understand accessibility, and then implement it within your solutions as you go along, and create an accessibility program, right? And reach out to people like us and Arman, and we will help you think this whole thing through beyond CSR, and making your products inclusive and world-class.
So I agree with everything that Shilpi says. To my mind, accessibility is non-negotiable, and disability needs investment, and investment gets you profit, investment gets you revenue, and this is again no rocket science. What you don't see is you don't understand, and and you fear it. So when disabled people are not part of your consumer dashboard, when they're not part of your school, colleges, and so on, when you don't see them in public, you don't understand it. And accessibility is the only core principle which can ensure inclusion and make disability an everyday affair for everyone. So I think it's good to do. An organization which will not include accessibility as part of their ethic, policies, tradition, culture will not cease to exist in next 20 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Arman and Shilpi. I suppose it is true. Prioritization is important in the leadership, and that's the only way to become a more inclusive country, not just at the workplace, but even beyond that. Thank you so much for your for your insights today. We hope to speak to you very soon. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.